Pat Tillman walked away from a $3.6 million NFL contract to serve in Afghanistan. The Army called him a hero. Congress investigated. His family still seeks answers. This isn't just friendly fire. It's about how a soldier became a symbol, and how far the government went to protect that story.
Who told you to shut up?
It was from the chain of command. I don't know exactly where it came from. So, it was like, hey, don't talk about this to anybody.
To understand why, we have to go back to 2000. The 2000 Arizona Cardinals season produced a franchise record that still stands today. Pat Tillman recorded 224 total tackles, and he was named to Paul Zimmerman's NFL All-Pro team. The Cardinals knew exactly what they had on their roster, and they weren't about to let him walk away.
Look how fired up Pat Tillman is.
Man, do they love this guy here in Arizona. He goes 150 miles an hour all the time.
In May 2002, the offer arrived on Tillman's table. 3 years, $3.6 million. The most money the Cardinals had ever offered a player in franchise history. 4 years earlier, Tillman had been drafted in the 7th round with a $21,000 signing bonus. And now Arizona was putting life-changing money in front of him. The kind of contract that should have made the decision easy. Instead, Tillman turned the offer down and enlisted in the United States Army alongside his brother Kevin. 8 months after September 11th changed everything. The decision didn't make sense to anyone watching from the outside. Analysts filled television segments trying to explain why someone would do this. His teammates struggled to process how a player walks away from that kind of contract. But here's the most interesting part. When he was enlisted, he made one request to the Army: keep it quiet. He asked the Army to let him serve without turning it into a spectacle. The Army ignored that request immediately. Within weeks, his enlistment became a Pentagon talking point. The NFL star who chose service over salary, the feel-good story the country needed after the towers fell. And Pat Tillman, who enlisted specifically to avoid becoming a symbol, watched the machinery turn him into exactly that without any way to stop it. Which plants the question that hangs over everything. Why does a man who has everything, the money, fame, and a future, just walk away from all of it?
Cardinals safety 25-year-old Pat Tillman putting his young NFL career on hold to join the U.S. Army.
And why does that decision end up killing him? 2 years later, on a vehicle recovery mission in Afghanistan, the answer arrived in the worst way possible. In Afghanistan, on April 22, 2004, Tillman's Ranger platoon was on a vehicle recovery mission in Khost Province, 25 miles southwest of the provincial capital near the Pakistan border. A Humvee broke down and the platoon split into 2 serials to handle the extraction. Serial 1, led by Lieutenant David Outlaut, moved forward with Tillman positioned as a dismounted rifleman. Serial 2 followed behind with the disabled vehicle, and Kevin Tillman was in Serial 2. The brothers were separated by canyon terrain, and the mission continued without either of them knowing what was about to happen. Serial 1 advanced into a narrow canyon near the village of Spera, and that's when Serial 2 took what sounded like incoming fire. The call went out over the radio, and Serial 2 opened up on what they believed were enemy positions further up the canyon. The problem was that they were firing on Serial 1's position. Pat Tillman was on a ridge with specialist Brian O'Neill and an Afghan militia fighter named Syed Farhad, who was allied with U.S. forces. Sergeant Greg Baker, positioned in Serial 2, caught sight of Farhad firing an AK-47. In the chaos of gunfire echoing off canyon walls, Baker didn't recognize him as friendly. He fired 7, maybe 8 rounds, and Farhad went down. That single burst triggered a fusillade from the other Rangers in Baker's vehicle. Tillman saw what was happening and set off a smoke grenade immediately. Purple smoke filled the air, the signal for a friendly position. He was waving his arms, trying to cut through the confusion, and the firing stopped. But Tillman and O'Neill stood up, believing the worst was over. The guns opened up again. 3 rounds hit Pat Tillman in the forehead. The grouping was tight, the kind of pattern that weeks later made the medical examiner note the wounds suggested a distance of 10 meters or less. Pat Tillman was 27 years old.
Pat Tillman determined to do something following the 9/11 terrorist attacks has died.
By the time investigators arrived and combed through the scene, they found zero evidence of enemy fire. Every spent casing came from American weapons. Everyone who was hit took friendly fire, and all the damage to government equipment came from the same source. But here's where the story stops being about a soldier dying and starts being about who knew what and when they decided to lie about it. The Army knew within hours that it was friendly fire. Officers on the ground suspected it immediately. Captain William Saunders later testified he was informed the morning of April 23rd, less than 24 hours after the incident. What the Army chose to do with that information would become the subject of 7 military investigations, 2 congressional hearings, and a family's 20-year fight for answers they still don't have. And what the Army chose to do with that information turned a tragedy into something far worse. The day after Pat Tillman died, soldiers received orders to burn his body armor. The reasoning they were given was security, preventing leaks and rumors from spreading. Military regulations required medical authority before destroying evidence in a potential friendly fire incident, and that authority was never obtained. The body armor burned anyway. But the destruction of evidence was just beginning. 2 days later, his uniform went into the fire, along with his vest. The journal he kept throughout his deployment got destroyed by fellow soldiers. His weapon disappeared from the evidence chain, his helmet was never recovered, and brain tissue that could have established the exact angle and distance of the shots vanished entirely. Every single act violated military protocol. And while physical evidence was being systematically erased, officers who knew the truth were building something else entirely. 6 days after Tillman's death, Lieutenant General Stanley McChrystal signed a Silver Star citation. The language described Tillman caught in the crossfire of an enemy near ambush, devastating enemy fire raining down, audacious leadership inspiring his men to fight at great risk, and the enemy's withdrawal under pressure. The thing is, none of it actually happened. There was no enemy ambush that day, which means there was no devastating enemy fire. The citation described Tillman maneuvering against known enemy positions, but investigators found no evidence those positions ever existed. And the enemy's withdrawal couldn't have happened because there was no enemy to begin with. The entire citation was fiction, and officers who witnessed the friendly fire signed witness statements supporting it anyway. The false story went national within hours. Pentagon press releases hit the wire describing Tillman charging uphill into enemy fire. ESPN ran the story across their platforms, and the White House referenced Tillman's heroic death in public statements. And here's what proves that this wasn't confusion or miscommunication. One day after approving that citation, McChrystal sent a confidential memo to General John Abizaid and 2 other senior officers. The memo warned them that they might include comments about Corporal Tillman's heroism in upcoming speeches. It warned them about the Silver Star Medal being presented. And it explicitly warned that doing so might cause public embarrassment if this became public. Meanwhile, as the hero narrative spread across the country, Army medical examiners reviewed Tillman's wounds and flagged the pattern as inconsistent with distance fire. The grouping suggested a close range, possibly as close as 10 meters, which didn't match the story being constructed. That report got buried for weeks. 11 days after Pat Tillman died, 3,000 people packed a venue in San Jose for his memorial service.
Some who'd never even met Pat Tillman have been waiting out here in the sun for about 3 hours.
The ceremony was broadcast nationally. Senator John McCain stood at the podium and delivered the eulogy. The Silver Star, the medal based on a completely fabricated narrative, was presented to the family in front of cameras. Kevin Tillman sat in the audience listening to people describe his brother's death, and he was not told the truth at the memorial service he attended in his brother's honor, while officers who knew the truth stood at the same podium. Specialist Brian O'Neill, who was the soldier positioned next to Pat when the shooting started, received explicit orders not to tell Kevin what happened. Fellow Ranger Russell Bayer got sent back to the United States with specific instructions not to reveal the friendly fire to the family. Bayer was so upset about being forced to lie to Pat's mother that he went AWOL. More than 5 weeks after Pat Tillman died, Kevin and Marie Tillman were finally informed about the friendly fire. The next day, May 28th, the Pentagon acknowledged it publicly. The Army got exactly what they wanted, a hero. They just had to erase the actual man to build him. Which raises the question everyone starts asking, does anyone actually pay for it? 7 Army investigations got launched in the aftermath. 5 generals came under scrutiny for their roles in either the cover-up or their failure to correct the false narrative once they knew the truth. 4 of them were found culpable. The number who faced court-martial was 0. Instead, they received administrative punishments. General Philip Kinzinger, the most senior officer implicated in the cover-up, received a formal reprimand in August 2007. The language was harsh, citing failure of leadership and lying to investigators during the official inquiry. He was referred to a review board for possible demotion from 3-star to 2-star rank, a move that would cut his monthly pension by nearly $1,000. The final outcome of that review was never made public. The other generals received memorandums of concern and letters of admonishments. Brigadier General Gina Farrisee got a memorandum. Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Bailey got a memorandum. Brigadier General Gary Jones got a letter. Brigadier General James Nixon got a letter. These were administrative actions, formal language on paper that followed officers into retirement and then disappeared into sealed files. And here's where accountability completely breaks down. Lieutenant General Stanley McChrystal, the officer who signed a Silver Star citation he knew was based on fabricated information, received no punishment whatsoever. Internal emails between Army attorneys, later obtained through investigative reporting, showed them sending congratulatory messages to each other for successfully keeping criminal investigators from opening a formal case. The lack of internal accountability forced Congress to step in. Between 2004 and 2007, Congress held 3 separate hearings trying to force transparency in a system that clearly wasn't providing it on its own. April 24, 2007, Specialist Brian O'Neill sat down in front of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform and testified under oath that he was ordered not to tell the family about the friendly fire. Kevin Tillman testified that the military deliberately spun his brother's death to deflect attention from emerging failings in the Afghan war. By July 13, 2007, Representatives Harry Waxman and Tom Davis revealed publicly that both the Bush administration and the Pentagon had been withholding key documents from congressional investigators, citing executive privilege as the reason to block their release. On August 1, 2007, the top officials took the stand. Donald Rumsfeld testified. General Richard Myers testified. General John Abazeed testified. Rumsfeld claimed repeatedly throughout his testimony that he had no memory of being briefed on the friendly fire possibility. But here's what his own records show. His correspondence, later obtained under FOIA, showed he received a memo flagging the friendly fire possibility within 2 weeks of the death. Months earlier, in December 2006, Kinzinger sat for his testimony with the Department of Defense Inspector General. Over the course of the questioning, he responded with the phrase, "I don't recall," 70 times. That's the systemic failure. Administrative punishment with no criminal charges. Selective memory from officials who signed the very documents contradicting their sworn testimony. Congressional oversight that finds culpability but lacks any real mechanism to impose consequences. But the human cost is measured differently. Mary Tillman spent years filing Freedom of Information Act requests, attending every hearing, and forcing corrections to the public record document by document. In 2008, she wrote a book laying out everything the family uncovered, and from there she continued. She gave interviews, she testified at congressional hearings, and she didn't stop pushing even when it became clear the military had no intention of providing real accountability.
I think a proper healing could have taken place if they told us the truth right away. But the healing was jagged.
When asked in 2008 what she wanted, she said accountability. She didn't get it. 20 years later, in a 2024 ESPN interview, Mary Tillman says the Army has never apologized to the family. They've never apologized to the soldiers they gaslighted into participating in the cover-up. The question isn't whether the government will lie to protect a useful story. We've established they will. The question is what it takes to force the truth out, and what it costs the people who try. Pat Tillman asked to serve without spectacle. The Army turned his death into a recruitment campaign before his family knew how he died. Every institution that exploits grief to protect its image is counting on the story being complicated enough that most people never dig in. This family dug in for 2 decades. At the very least, we should know what they found. If this story hit you different, hit the like button and drop a comment. What cover-up should we expose next? Subscribe, because you won't want to miss our next video.